The bubonic plague was rapidly spreading throughout Jaffa, and the number of sick increased with each passing day. The French army in this campaign had never been so close to perishing. Loret, Desjeunet, and other doctors made incredible efforts to prevent the spread of the disease. Soldiers were ordered to burn all seized items indiscriminately during the looting of the city, and doctors recommended complete isolation for those afflicted with the plague. Dr. Desjeunet knew well the disease he was dealing with, but wisely insisted on concealing its true name from the army. However, despite his efforts, these endeavors became futile after a few days. The terrified city dwellers hid in their homes and refused to interact with the French. Shortly thereafter, the medics began deserting. Fear gripped the entire army. General Bonaparte made a move comparable in risk to storming the bridge at Arcole to counteract the spread of disorganization and panic. On March 11, 1799, General Bonaparte, accompanied by his staff, deemed it his duty to visit the hospital. The general traversed the entire hospital and its annex, conversing with almost all the soldiers who were conscious enough to hear him, and for an hour and a half, with the greatest composure, attended to the details of management. In a very small and overcrowded ward, he helped lift, or rather carry, the dreadful corpse of a soldier whose torn uniform was stained with a burst, draining bubo. The commander-in-chief's action had an excellent effect. Panic in the army ceased, and among the soldiers, a rumor quickly spread that the plague only struck those who feared it. So, after visiting the hospital, Bonaparte ordered the army to move forward. On March 14th, the French troops left Jaffa and just a few days later, after overcoming minor resistance, entered Haifa, seizing large food warehouses that the enemy had not had time to evacuate. As the French approached Acre, a dreadful fear gripped Djezzar's troops and the city residents, as they were well aware of the fate of the Jaffa garrison. Djezzar Pasha himself seriously contemplated evacuating from Acre by ship in those days, but unexpected help came to him. On March 18th, while on Mount Carmel, the commander-in-chief noticed two British 80-gun ships commanded by Commodore Sir Sidney Smith standing in the roadstead of Acre. They had arrived in the roadstead of Acre from Constantinople just 2 days ago. The arrival of the British fleet somewhat reassured Djezzar and his warriors. Moreover, on board the British battleship was an extremely talented engineering officer who could help Djezzar organize an effective defense. This was Antoine Lupicard du Philippot, a French officer and royalist supporter who had fought on the side of the coalition against the Republic. Ironically, he was a classmate of Bonaparte's at the Paris Military School. They sat at the same desk during their studies. Furthermore, during these days, another fateful event would significantly affect the course of the siege. The French fleet carrying siege artillery did not receive timely information that British battleships were on course due to an unfortunate accident. As a result, the English captured almost the entire fleet with siege artillery on board. Thus, if not for the delay in El Arish, Bonaparte would have reached Acre before the English fleet arrived, and Acre would undoubtedly have fallen within a few days. However, Bonaparte did not consider the loss of the siege park a critical circumstance. After the successful storming of Jaffa, the French believed they would take Acre even with field artillery. On March 19th, the French approached the city walls. About 12,000 people lived in Acre. The garrison consisted of about 5,000 soldiers and 250 guns with huge stocks of gunpowder. Acre's main fortifications and walls were built during the Crusades and, despite their dilapidated appearance, were quite strong. However, the most important thing for Djezzar was that British battleships were in Acre's roadstead, which allowed supplies and reinforcements to be delivered unhindered. On the night of March 19th to 20th, the French conducted a reconnaissance of Acre's fortifications. However, the engineering officer couldn't thoroughly inspect the fortifications due to heavy gunfire from the top of the walls. Nevertheless, he reported that the walls of Acre were no stronger than those in Jaffa, and that the ditch he discovered along the walls was shallow. Ultimately, the conclusion was drawn that the city could be taken by a bold attack. To attack Acre, trenches needed to be dug from the siege camp to the walls to shield the attackers from the defenders' crossfire. Additionally, this would allow the French to plant mines under the walls or towers. Active preparations for the assault went on over the following week. It was decided to concentrate the attacking efforts where the walls formed a corner and were closest to the French. In the first wave of the assault, 2 companies of the bravest carabiniers were to go, supported by a detachment of sappers. This assault unit had ladders and fascines prepared to fill the ditch. Staff Officer Chateau Renaud was to lead the carabiniers in the assault. Then the main forces of Kleber's and Regnier's divisions were to follow through the breach. Bond's and Land's divisions remained in reserve. So, at dawn on March 28th, the French field artillery opened fire. At that moment, true terror gripped the defenders of Acre. Some had already abandoned their positions and fled, and Jazar was already aboard the ship with all his belongings at this time. Finally, around 4 p.m., a part of the tower collapsed amidst the enthusiastic French cries. After this, Chateau Renaud led the carabiniers in the assault. En avant! However, as the French approached the walls, they discovered that the ditch was much deeper than anticipated, and the fascines became utterly useless. Moreover, the ditch had a counterscarp. Yet, Chateau Renaud did not retreat. Despite the hail of fire, soldiers with ladders attempted to overcome the ditch, but many of them, upon jumping down, couldn't climb back up. After finding themselves trapped, Jazar's infantry quickly shot them. In the end, almost the entire vanguard of the storming column perished. The dead included Chateau Renaud and several colonels. Thus, the first assault failed, significantly altering the morale of Acre's defenders. Following barbaric customs, Jazar established a generous reward for every severed head of a French soldier brought to him. At the same time, Sidney Smith promptly landed 800 English soldiers to reinforce Jazar's garrison, while Colonel Philippot worked day and night on fortifications and essentially directed the entire defense. He decided not just to focus on repelling French attacks, but to conduct active defense involving regular sorties and counterattacks. Supplies of gunpowder, provisions, and the ability to replenish the garrison greatly contributed to this plan. And just a few days after the first assault, the besieged launched a sortie. Under the cover of continuous artillery fire, several thousand Arabs attacked the French trenches. Bonaparte promptly ordered the 32nd Demi Brigade to launch a counterattack. This formidable Demi Brigade swiftly repelled the enemy infantry back into the fortress with a bayonet attack. The next day, the French attempted to capitalize on their success. By this time, the ditch was partially filled with stones, and after the explosion of another mine, Divisional General Kleber led the assault with 6 grenadier companies. Bataillon marche! However, once again, the crossfire from the top of the walls was so powerful and intense that the assault ended in a bloodbath. Nearly all who participated were wounded or killed. By this point, it became apparent that until siege artillery arrived and full trenches were dug, attempts at storming would only result in heavy losses. Thus, it was decided to halt the attacks and prepare for the assault more thoroughly. Meanwhile, despite constant fighting in the trenches, soldiers in the siege camp felt excellent. Christians from all nearby towns and villages gathered at the French camp. They offered various goods for sale, and the French had no problems with water, provisions, or spirits. With each passing day, our camp resembles a country fair more and more. Wine, spirits, figs, wheat cakes, grapes, oil, and so on. Everything is in abundance here, albeit at sky-high prices. But during the campaign, pennies aren't counted. In addition, various delegations from Nazareth, Jerusalem, and other cities visited the French camp. They all complained about the cruelty and abuses of Caesar and expressed support for Bonaparte. All the Syrians hate Caesar. There is no torture he has not inflicted on the Christians as well as on the Muslims of Syria, and even on his most faithful followers. He has cut the noses and ears off some, blinded and maimed others, or shod them like horses. Thus, Bonaparte had substantial grounds to believe that at least a significant portion of the Syrian population, especially the Druze and Christians whom Caesar occasionally killed, would support him against Ottoman rule. Meanwhile, the siege works continued. The trenches dug by the French had already reached close to the walls, allowing them to take cover from enemy fire. However, preparation for the decisive assault had to be interrupted again due to a new threat. Information had been received that a 30,000-strong army from Damascus had come out to aid Caesar. These troops were already approaching the Jordan River, posing a real threat of encirclement to the French under the walls of Acre.